Hello, today we'll be looking at the quadratic formula. Oops. All right, so we have previously discussed factoring quadratic equations and also solving quadratic equations by taking the square root. But what happens when this process is too time consuming or we cannot factor easily or easily find the square root? Well, that's when we use the quadratic formula. So mathematicians like myself, we're always looking for ways or shortcuts to solve equations. And so the quadratic formula is one of those shortcuts. It's an easy way to find the solutions for a quadratic equation. So let's derive the quadratic formula. I think that'll be a fun exercise to do. All right, so we need to begin with the standard form of the quadratic equation. So the standard form for the quadratic equation is, oops, turn my pen on. If you recall, ax squared plus bx plus c. And it also says here that we have to set it equal to 0. So why are we setting it equal to 0? Well, we're setting it equal to 0 because we want to find the solutions. So we're looking for the solutions are the places where this equation crosses our x-axis. So we're looking for the roots or the zeros or the solutions. So in order to find the solutions, we have to set it equal to 0 because we want to find out where our y is 0. So when our y is equal to 0, what are our values of x? So that's why it's set equal to 0. So the first thing that we're going to do is subtract c from both sides. So we have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And just like I would to solve an equation, I'm going to subtract c from both sides. And that's going to give me, I'm going to write down here, ax squared plus bx is equal to negative c. All right, so now we can factor out an a. All right, again, we have a x squared plus bx equals negative c. I want to pull this a out, so I'm going to have a pulled out, x squared. This term did not have an a, so I'm going to have it divided by a instead. And everything is still equal to negative c. All right. Next, we have to complete the square. And we've already reviewed completing the square, so this should be fun and easy for you to follow along for completing the square here again. So again, we have a times x squared plus b over a x equals to negative c. So if you recall, when we complete the square, we take this term here, we're going to divide it by 2. So when we divide it by 2, it's going to be b over 2a x. And then we're going to square the whole term. So this is our new term. So we have a times x squared plus b over a x plus, remember we square this, so it's b squared. That 2 becomes 4, and we have a squared. And remember, whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So I'm going to write it here. So we have negative c plus b squared all over 4a. So what happened to the a squared? Well, we multiply by this a, remember? So a times b squared over 4a squared. One of my a's squared is going to cancel out here. So it's going to leave me with just 4a. All right, so now we need a common denominator, So, and the common denominator is for the right side. So we want to combine those terms that we just found on the right side, and we need a common denominator first to be able to do that. So let's write what we have first. Let's start off with that. So we have a times x squared plus b over a x plus b squared all over 4a squared. Oops. Is equal to, remember we had negative c plus b squared all over 4a. Well, I want this to have 4a also, so I'm going to put 4a here. Remember, whatever I do to the whatever I do to the bottom, I have to also do to the top. So it's like multiplying by a form of 1, right? So I have 4 over a 4a over 4a, which is 1, times negative c. So I just changed the form. So without writing this over, I'm going to rewrite it. It's going to be negative 4ac. Remember, in algebra, we usually write our variables in alphabetical order. All over 4a plus b squared all over 4a. So now I can combine those, right? And I can also reduce this because I completed the square, so that means that I can condense it to square form. So I have a times x plus, remember I just take the square root of everything there, b over 4a, now it's squared, equals, and I'm going to, well, no I won't, not yet. So 4ac plus b squared, and now I have just that one denominator of 4a. Okay? All right, so I already combined the fraction on the right. I skipped ahead. I apologize. All right, so now we can solve for x. So, okay, so now we can solve for x. So let's do it. I have, again, a times x plus b over 2a squared is equal to negative 4ac plus b squared all over 4a. So the first thing that I need to do is divide by a, because I want to solve for x. So this a is the first thing that's getting in the way of everything, right? So I need to divide everything by a. So divide this side by a and divide this side by a. So when I do that, I get x plus b over 2a squared equals negative 4ac plus b squared all over 4a squared, because I divided by that a. So that a comes in the denominator. So that a times a gives me a squared. All right, so now I'm still trying to solve for x. So the goal is to get x by itself. So I need to take the square root of both sides. So whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I get x plus b over 2a is equal to the square root of, and I am going to switch it around now because it's starting to bother me a little bit. So I'm going to put my b squared first, and then I'm going to do minus 4ac all over 4a squared. And I can't forget about my plus or minus, because when I take the square root, there's a possibility that it's a positive or a negative, right? So also, I see here that I can take the square root of this 4a. So let's do that. So I have x plus b over 2a is equal to plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. And then I've taken the square root of that 4a squared, and that gives me 2a. Okay? And this is a plus or minus. Okay. So now x is almost alone. All I have to do is subtract this b over 2a. Right? That's the only thing I have left to do. So I have x is equal to negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I bet you say, oh, now I see why she took the square root of that 4a squared, because now my denominators are the same and I can combine them. So let's go to the next screen so we can combine them because I've run out of space. And so when I combine them, I get x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Now everything is all over 2a. And ta-da, I have the quadratic formula. So now I can use this quadratic formula and I can solve quadratic equations with them. I can find out what my solutions are. I can find out what my roots are. These are all the same things, right? We already discussed this, but my solutions, my roots, my intercepts, I can find out what those things are by using this formula. So let's do an example. I always have to do an example to make sure we understand what we're working with, right? So let's take negative 3. I've gotten in a habit of writing x. Excuse me. Okay. So I have negative 3x squared, not a squared. Sorry. Plus 10x minus 3. Remember, it has to be equal to 0 because I want to find out what my solution is. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name what my values are. So I have a is equal to negative 3, b is equal to 10, and c is equal to negative 3. And I'm going to write my formula here. So I have x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So let's plug in what we have. So I have x equals negative b, so that's going to be negative 10, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 100, minus 4 times my a, which is negative 3, times my c, which is negative 3, all over 2 times my a, which is negative 3. So let's go ahead and start evaluating. Order of operations is very important, right? We have to always adhere to order of operations. So I have 100. So I have negative 3 times negative 3, which is positive 9 times 4, which is 36, all over 2 times negative 3, which is negative 6. So I get x is equal to negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 100 minus 36 is 64, all over negative 6. So I get x is equal to negative 10 plus or minus 8 all over negative 6. So now I can evaluate. So now I have negative 10 plus 8 divided by negative 6, and I have negative 10 minus 8 divided by negative 6. So we get two different answers, right? So remember, the parabola has those two different places where it crosses the x-axis, right? So that x-axis is right here, and it hits it at here and here, two different places. Well, it could hit it at two places, right? We've talked about this before. It can hit it at one places, can hit it at 0 places. But this should give us an answer for at most 2 places. So negative 10 plus 8. So negative 10 plus 8 is negative 2. So negative 2 divided by a negative 6 is, so my first is positive 1/3. The next one is negative 10 minus 8. So negative 10 minus 8 is negative 18. Negative 18 divided by negative 6 gives me a positive 3. And so those are my two solutions. And I hope that this helps.